Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive, the podcast that skips small talk and goes straight for the concepts that shape our thinking and behavior. In this podcast, cold expertise is defenestrated as warm philosophy is enthroned in an attempt to explore the field in which we're all scientists looking for answers, living well. Hello world, welcome to another deep dive with Eyal Shai. My guest today is Daniel Vassallo. Hi Daniel.
Hi Eyal, hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on very much. And I'll let you take the lead and introduce the topic we are going to discuss today.
Yeah, so I think as you mentioned to me before, we're going to talk about lifestyle first work and sort of unconventional work arrangements where instead of thinking about, maybe increasing financial potential or financial expected value or other things, it's sort of the type of work where it starts from your desired lifestyle and then you try to fit work that matches your lifestyle or enhances it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very fascinated by the journey you're describing in your work. And I really want to go after the evolution of this type of thinking that leads you. So if you don't mind taking us back to as far back as you see fitting and see the beginning of this idea. Has it always been the case that what mattered to you the most was your lifestyle?
Probably subconsciously, yes, but I wasn't really aware of it. So I think, my career started more or less, going a traditional route. After college, I was working for a couple of small companies. Then about 10 years ago, about 2010, I got hired by Amazon, right? So sort of a jump to a big corporation. And, going in, initially, I thought it was going to be temporary. I knew that it was unlikely that I'm going to be liking working in a big bureaucratic sort of company, right, where you just one cog in sort of a big machine and so on and so forth. But, back then, I thought it was a good thing because, I'm a software developer by background. I always liked tinkering with computers. It was an opportunity to sort of get exposed to how, a big company in tech works. Right? So I was looking forward to absorbing and learning and sort of getting exposed to something that I wasn't exposed to before. Long story short, after a few years at Amazon, things were going well by many measures. I was getting promoted, I was getting pay raises. They invited me to move to the United States after a couple of years, which was great. Everything was going well, right? And I was told, and it was clear that I had potential to keep growing and so on and so forth. The problem was that, as I was looking back at my life, right, sort of despite making, a lot of money, despite things going well, getting promoted and working on my desire, sort of my dream projects and so on, sort of, I was noticing that my life wasn't particularly improving, right? I had, back then, sort of, I had two small kids, right? Sort of, and I was finding it hard to spend time with my family. For example, right, I was leaving home early, coming late-ish at night, feeling with no energy after I come from work, even on the weekends, even if I wasn't working, there was always things on my mind related to work because there was lots of responsibilities, people waiting for things that I needed something to do, like to unblock them. Very, very sort of, burdensome type of work arrangement. And apart from that, I was looking also at my colleagues, especially my peers who were maybe a few steps higher than me. And similarly, I wasn't really envying their lifestyle. I mean, envying in a good sense. That I was thinking, I don't want to be in their shoes. Right? Basically, they were in the same situation or sometimes even worse than me. And so sort of this was an eye-opening reflection that sort of allowed me to reconsider that whether this was the right path for me. And again, probably if I were to measure the path from financial potential, staying there would probably have been better, right? Just because, you know, it was a reasonably cushy job. Nevertheless, it was highly paid. There was still more money to make, lots more opportunities, and you know, financially it was definitely great. But the fact that my life wasn't improving, it made me ask myself, like, what's the point, right? Why I was sort of meeting with friends and family who might be making a lot less money, and sort of I was realizing that maybe they were enjoying their life better, like they had more flexibility. They, you know, they weren't as constrained with their work as I was, and things like that. So that was definitely the biggest moment, that where I realized I had picked a path. It was working by many traditional measures. Nevertheless, it wasn't sort of conducive to a good lifestyle for me. The problem was that I didn't really know exactly how to fix it right immediately. And sort of the first thing I tried, almost out of desperation, was to realize, like, you know, I need to close off this chapter, right, working in big tech, and I'm going to try to work for myself, right? And I didn't think it was a huge risk, right? If it didn't work, I could always go back, right? So it was at least some way to randomize things and see if I can make things better. So sort of that's the genesis of it, I would say. That's how it started, and then sort of happy to continue to talk about sort of the next part.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually curious about 16, 17, 18-year-old Daniel before going to college, because, and I'll tell you why, because my thought when I look at the corporate structure and see how hierarchical it is, you know, just like the church or other organizations like that. The thing you need to really get up the ranks is ambition, I think. Feel free to correct me. And I'm just wondering if these things were competing, like as a young person, did you have an ambition to first get to some sort of peak, and it was that getting to that peak the point of disillusionment, or did you just kind of stumble upon this type of corporate job and you were just doing well enough in your work that you were promoted? Like, what was the initial motivation to get into tech and then to go up levels?
Probably it wasn't the kind of ambition that we tend to associate ambition with. I grew up, my family were small business owners. I wasn't really exposed to the corporate life growing up myself as a young kid, and the structured way of working that it's sort of, I experienced it myself firsthand. So I wasn't really ambitious from a position of thinking I want to become higher levels, better job titles and things like that. They were quite alien concepts to me, actually. I think more than that, it was more, I had been fascinated by computers and programming since I was like 5 years old. I always had the dream of getting paid and finding a profession as a software engineer. And I would say probably my ambition was more about trying to maximize that. So I tried to get more of it, better at it. And sort of, I think the main motivation for getting, first of all, my first job as a programmer, it was highly satisfying because that's what I really wanted to do. This is my dream job. Then get into big tech, into big companies was because, again, from a curiosity point of view, more or less, I was feeling I'm missing out. Essentially, that I knew how to do certain things. I was mostly self-taught. Sure, I went to college, but like many programmers, mostly figure things out on myself. And I figured there are these things that some big companies are doing that I had absolutely no clue how they're done. And I thought the only way for me to do it was to sort of to get a peek from the inside. So initially, it was purely almost for its own curiosity, learning kind of thing, rather than, again, like maximizing status, job title, or financial values. It's more that when I went in, that things started to change, because the environment pushes you, right? I mean, the highly structured corporate environment, again, like keeps dangling bonuses and promotions and job titles. It becomes like a video game, right? If you do these things, you level up, right? So it's almost you become it becomes automatic, right? You need to be very disciplined to break out of it, right? Sort of, it's very, very hard.
Yeah. Is it like, how common is it, would you say, that somebody keeps their crosshairs on something like well-being or lifestyle rather than being gobbled up by this system, not just in terms of the hours of work, but also in terms of the ideas, where you work such long hours and you work so hard. And I'm assuming, I don't come from the corporate world myself, but there must be a feeling that you are needed. So there's also almost like social pressure from the company to identify with the company. And would it be fair on my part to assume that many people actually get lost in that and just at some point identify with their job title and with the mission within the company and so on? So in other words, are you unusual?
I think in the current environment that I was, yes. And I think the problem is that there are certain people, I think, that this type of work environment is perfect for them. Right? I probably, you could recognize them, right? They flourish in the highly structured way. We're all different, right? Again, like, there's not a judgment on anything. It's just personalities and preferences. Right? So I think there's some people who this really works. They would struggle and suffer if it was less structured type of work, right? Then I think, there are people who work in work arrangements where they absolutely hate, right? It's like hell for them. And for them, it's probably easier for them to notice that this is making their life completely miserable and they need to change, right? So it's sort of, when something is really bad, it prompts action. I think what's really difficult is the thing in between, which is what I was. It wasn't hell, right? For me, it wasn't like I was suffering, and neither were my colleagues. It was just this basin of sort of demotivation, right? And moderate unhappiness that it was hard to get out of, because it was hard to imagine something better concretely. Right? Okay, I leave, but what do I do? And there was also the effect that, things are so good by many other measures, and I worked so hard to get there, and I was so lucky to get there, that sometimes you recognize the good timing and chance that got you in that place, that it feels like, you've won the lottery ticket and then you're not cashing it out completely. Right? So it really messes up with your wiring, right? So it's really problematic. And this is super common, right? I talk with my ex-colleagues, I'm still friends with many of them. It's a super common sentiment. I'm unhappy, relatively, right? I mean, things could be better. I dislike all the purposeless work that I do and all these kinds of things. My life is, I barely have time for anything. But then what, right? I mean, what can I do? Can I really leave after working 20 years to get to where I am? And if I leave, why are things going to get better? Right? So that's the problem. So you have these extremes, like if things are hell, it prompts action and you tend to do something. If you're the kind of person who this is perfect for you, obviously, you stay. And I think I was someone in between. It's like this basin where you can't get out, right? Sort of.
Yeah, it really is resonating with things I'm undergoing with my life, because my wife and I are living in this place in Israel that's in the countryside. It's beautiful. It's almost like SimCity beautiful. And like you say, like, a lot of people are dying to be living here. They have this dream of like, oh, I'll marry someone from the kibbutz or from this type of place. And for us, it's just as you say, it's like nothing is terrible. We can do whatever we want. Everything here is super comfortable because the history is such that these type of places where we live in, this type of villages are actually cheaper than the rest of the country, which is pretty expensive otherwise. And yet we might want something different. And I totally sympathize with you there, where it's not the type of situation where it was like everything is horrible and it's so easy to leave. And it's also you aspire for more. I also think that some of the people, like you say, are even the very miserable ones could even, just look at themselves from the lens of society and not have the ability to introspect or to really be connected with their feelings to the point where they actually don't have any feelings arise in them when they think of a better future, which I think is a problem. So it takes some degree of functioning imagination and ability to know yourself emotionally to even think of this vision for a better future for yourself. And that's something I really sympathize with you on this point. Yeah, in terms of what to do if not the known thing, did you manage to get at any point to a stage where you have this plan laid out, or does it have to be a plunge into the unknown?
Oh, good question. I don't know, how generalizable what I did was. I mean, that's what I did. That time, basically, I was lucky. I had some savings. I could take some time to try to figure things out. And I think what ended up happening was I tried many different things and many different work arrangements, and I stumbled on things. Right? I started discovering my preferences. I mean, probably something I had already known about myself was that in general, I dislike highly structured arrangements of any sort. That's so sort of the element of randomness and uncertainty that I was facing when I jumped into self-employment. I sort of knew that would likely help me. Right? Nevertheless, then still, I wasn't sure whether I was going to be starting, a business that, I needed to end up building a team or hiring employees, or something that was much simpler, or continue to do things on myself. Like, what type of work was I going to be doing? Was I going to be doing freelancing, building a product business, and so on and so forth? There was still lots of uncertainty. I started just tinkering and experimenting with all these things and sort of trying to understand what I'm doing right now, always reflecting, like, is this compatible with me? Am I enjoying it? Do I see a potential for this? And I kept tweaking and arranging. And I think, again, like, the fact that I didn't have a structure has allowed me to do this. This is one of the problems, I think, with highly structured work arrangements, like the 40-hour work week, is that if you realize that, your better arrangement is you work 30 hours, or you work 40 hours one week and 20 hours the next week, or whatever, or you work in a particular different time arrangements, that you work a little bit in the morning and a little bit late at night. If you discover these things about yourself, usually for most jobs, you can't really adjust, right? So sort of then we start feeling, burnt out, unhappy, and, wondering what we can, what's wrong, and so on and so forth. Whereas with less structure, almost subconsciously, you start experimenting, right? You start sometimes overdoing, sometimes underdoing, sometimes having the wrong combination of things. And then you start discovering what's the right arrangement, essentially. I know this may be a bit abstract, right? But that's sort of what happened to me. Right? Just tried many different things. I saw what worked, was giving me energy, what was working from a financial point of view, because that was an important part of the Venn diagram as well. It wasn't just things that were fun, but things that needed to sort of allow me to live off them, right? So, and I just keep improving. I'm still sort of in this mode where, right now, sort of my test has become very much, what's the point of me doing this? And if it's not really something that is going to help me sustain my current lifestyle or improve it, then I wonder, is it worth doing? Should I be doing it differently? And it's been sort of useful to think about it that way, because many times just that reflection helps us realize that, you know, the path that we're going on, right, even though it might seem at face value, you know, something that is worth doing, right? Because again, sort of there's these incentives, even if they're not being dangled now against by employers, right? There's just these incentives of making more money or growing your business more and so on and so forth. You know, but if your business is not improving your life, again, like, what's the point?
Yeah, and so just a quick question: how long have you been on this journey of self-employment at this point?
Almost 3 years. Like, so I left my job in February of 2019. So 3 years minus a couple of months at this point.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in hearing about the first experiments. Were they in the domain you already knew well of programming, or at that point probably managing, so on, or did you experiment with things that are completely different as well?
So in the beginning, it was purely in the domain, and that was probably a mistake that I did, not necessarily the fact of what I chose, but sort of my thinking was that, okay, I have like 16 years of professional software development experience. I sort of had worked in the last 10 years in a particular domain in databases, right, in tech. I specialized in a particular domain. So I thought, surely the best way to increase my odds of success are going to be, you know, leveraging all my skills, all my experience, all my domain knowledge, and just focus and concentrate on that, right? I mean, because what else? Like, I mean, if this doesn't work, the thing that I sort of dedicated a decade or more on, nothing else is going to come close. And I think the mistake that I did there is that I underestimated the role of chance and randomness in business success, right? It's sort of incredibly, this is an incredibly common problem, I believe, right? Is that we tend to treat self-employment and exploring and trying to discover what works and what doesn't similarly to things that we did in the very predictable world of full-time employment. You know, when I was an employee, you set a goal, you try to break it down into small pieces, and every day you work towards it, and eventually you reach that goal, maybe a month late, maybe a month early, but you get there. And you get your goal, and you know, you reap the reward, whatever it is. In self-employment, especially when you go in product businesses, like you create a new product and you try to sell it, whether it works or not, there's a huge role of things outside of your control. Right? I mean, you might be doing everything right. You might have the best product, the best service, the best pricing, the best marketing, great reputation. You have all the right ingredients. But, you know, for a product business to succeed, it relies on human behavior. Human behavior is highly complex, highly unpredictable things. And whatever it is, it might still not work. And you might not even know why it didn't work, right? It's just something didn't resonate. We tend to say the timing wasn't right, right? Or sort of things the stars didn't really align. And you might not even know which star was out of place, right? And sort of this was a problem. Again, this sort of after a few months in, again, I think like about 4 or 5 months in, my subconscious started to nag me again. Sort of I started to realize that I was putting all the eggs in one basket. And this was a highly unpredictable, highly uncertain basket, right? And sort of the prudent part of my brain was sort of telling me, are you sure this is the right strategy? What if it doesn't work out? When will you know if it doesn't work out? How long are you going to keep waiting for results to materialize? Right? When will you choose to change and pivot? Right? And I was starting to worry that no, basically the problem became that I was really enjoying my new lifestyle, right? The flexibility that I had, the fact that I was working on my own terms. I didn't need to ask anyone permission to do anything. I had more time with my family. Everything was great. I didn't want that to be taken away from me. So it was a bit of a crisis of anxiety. Like, I really want to maximize the odds, not of maximizing profits, but of not having this lifestyle taken away from me.
Right.
Right. So very different business plan. Right. My business plan was like to not go back to full-time employment, essentially, like my new one. So this made me reconsider that. I mean, it was again like an eye-opening reflection. And what I chose to do then, rather than keep focusing on one thing, my specialty, I just started trying lots of different things, right? I mean, things that in the back of my head were like plan B, plan C, plan D. Like if the first thing doesn't work out, maybe I'll try the second, maybe I'll try the third. And then at that point, I said, why wait until something fails? Why don't I try everything at the same time? Like plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, all pretty much in parallel. And this was hugely important for me. Like, I mean, when I did this, first of all, I discovered a lot of things about myself, like things that I never knew I was going to enjoy, or things that I thought were unlikely to work ended up being the ones that worked best and I enjoyed doing most, right? And again, like I discovered the opposite, of course, like things that I thought they were going to be great for me were maybe less optimal. And sort of this arrangement of, you know, having a portfolio of things rather than focusing on one thing has also helped me a lot from a motivational perspective. Like, you know, no matter how much you like something, at some point you start running out of energy, right? Or you sort of want to take a break. And having multiple things going on has allowed me to sort of alternate my attention to, you know, this week I focus on that. The week after I can change and focus on something else. And it's been sort of very, very helpful. And again, like just psychologically, the fact that I'm diversifying just added a lot of more peace of mind. Like that was very immediate. The effect was incredible. How, you know, that anxiety went away. Right, once I had a few things, and there were like a couple of things starting to show some signs of success. How different it makes it nowadays. For example, even if I'm trying something new, right, I don't feel that, again, like that sense of anxiety that I really need this to work just because I have other things going on, right? It's just you try things, you experiment, you know, there's an element of uncertainty, and you just go in with much more peace of mind, just knowing that, you know, if it doesn't work out, slight disappointment, but no big deal. There's other 4 things, 5 things going on that I can continue to live on, right? So this has been sort of my new arrangement, right? Sort of, I'm calling it like creating a portfolio of small bets, right? Just doing a few things at the same time, small things that I can do by myself as much as possible. Has allowed me both to diversify, both to find success in places where I didn't know there was that much success to be had, and to discover again, to continue to discover my own preferences, right? Something that I think it's a never, you know, something that goes on probably for all our lives. And it changes again. Like I think as our lives changes, maybe what I'm liking now with 2 young kids will be different from when I'm, from when my kids grow up, right? Or from before when I was single, probably I would have liked different arrangements. So it's good to also be adaptable. It's again another problem that sort of the 40-hour traditional work week of full-time employment doesn't really allow much adaptation, right? It's sort of your life has to adapt to your work rather than
absolutely
you know, the other way around. There's all trade-offs, right? I mean, this most of the times is, you know, you choose to make less money or to be less ambitious or to avoid pursuing something because you think that your lifestyle is going to suffer. Right? So sometimes it's hard, right? I mean, these things are not easy. There's always trade-offs. It's not like you have everything.
Right. No, it definitely takes courage. And again, I find so many of your things to resonate with my thoughts also about, so I have this maxim by now that I kind of tell people, which is security kills serendipity. You know, if you go for that security of really going for that job and just having this peace of mind that comes from, I won't be looking for food on the street. Well, that's a kind of peace of mind, but actually it leaves room only for really bad surprises to come into your life. because you haven't left any room for example, and I want to hear from you about this, so I'll ask you in a minute, for example, about having new ideas, of actually monitoring your preferences and seeing what you actually enjoy doing and what you don't. Now, you're mentioning like it's a normal, trivial thing to be able to tap into your own preferences and see what you like doing and experiment with new things. I think it's not trivial at all, and I want to hear from you. What is the process? Is it just that more free time allows you to not be focused, laser focused on something, and therefore your mind can wander, and all of a sudden from the subconscious something bubbles up that's a new idea of something maybe you've never done before, and you go out and try it and you find you like it? Is that a normal way for the process to happen, or are you more consciously I don't know, signing up for classes that for new things that you might like?
So interesting sort of question. I think it's two things. There's the Seneca quote, which I think is attributed to him, I believe, where luck is preparation meets opportunity. Have you ever heard about that? It's an interesting, because I think it's similar to your statement about serendipity, right? I mean, calling luck good serendipity is, I think, the preparation and opportunity parts are relevant. And I think from the preparation part, what's important is some of the things you hinted at, having abundant spare time, right? Sort of having slack in the system, because as you noted, if you're busy, you basically shut off all good opportunity because you start not even seeing them, right? I think there's something subconscious that if we're focused on one goal, super busy, we just want to get that thing done, we tend to put on like the blinders on so that we don't get distracted. So no matter how good serendipitous things happen, we might not even recognize them, let alone take advantage of them. So there's some amount of preparation, which probably also involves being prepared sort of from a capabilities and skills perspective, right? I mean, obviously, to benefit from good opportunities, you need to be able to pounce on things when opportunities come, and you need to sort of be prepared. You need to have some skills of some sort to be able to take advantage of things, right? So that's something that, again, like you continuously improve, and you might already have just from your education background, work experience, and so on and so forth. But probably the thing that most people lack, that sort of I managed to, again, like just stumble on, is what I call like you need an inspiration generator, right? You need something happening to you almost every day, right? That sort of allows you to bump into random things. Consider that, I think a good analogy is, for example, consider how a book publisher works, right? A type of business that works in a very unpredictable world, right? A book publisher never knows which books are going to be bestsellers, and which books are going to be more profitable than others, and so on and so forth. So the way a book publisher gets ideas is basically there's probably aspiring book authors, right, or aspiring authors who are just pitching their book ideas to the publisher on a daily basis. They're saying, I'm writing a novel about this, or I'm writing a nonfiction book about that. And like the inbox of the book publisher is always getting this stream of ideas. Would you publish this? Would you publish that? Would you do that? And, the book publisher then gets the opportunity to go to this list of, opportunities on a daily basis and choose which one to invest in and or sort of avoid, right? And I think at an individual level, we need to do something similar, right? And for me, this is going to be different for everyone, right? For me, what the system that I really like to work has been social media, Twitter in particular. I mean, Twitter has been my inspiration generator, like consuming, not writing on Twitter. I mean, that helped me on other things, but just organically, I started following a few interesting people who are doing unconventional things. And almost on a daily basis, as part of my routine, I spend hours every day, 3-4 hours easily, just scrolling over Twitter, see what other people are doing. And just this exposure, it's like being at a cocktail party with random strangers, right? And you bump into casual chance encounters, casual conversations about what are you doing, so on and so forth. And just Twitter allows me to do that without the sort of other things that I dislike about parties. Right? To do it from the comfort of my home, scrolling around, the opportunity to jump into conversations. And fundamentally, what this leads to is that I see people doing unconventional things mostly. And occasionally I ask myself, is this interesting for me? Is this something I can do? Could I do something like this, but with a slight different twist or in a slightly different domain? And, for 360 days out of 365 of the year, probably nothing comes out of this, right? Again, like this is just like going out to a party every day and nothing life-changing happens for most of them. But then there's like those 5 times out of 365 in the year where something really, the inspiration, preparation and opportunity end up meeting, right? And that's where you notice luck, you recognize it, and then you sort of have the opportunity to pounce. Pretty much, I would go as far as saying pretty much everything that I'm doing right now I can probably attribute it to an event that I stumbled on something on Twitter, I reflected, I tried it out sort of with my own take, and then sort of it worked out. Everything that's worked out or didn't work out, pretty much everything that I've done, I can sort of pinpoint it to some chance encounter on Twitter that I stumbled on that made me reflect, right? So it's this inspiration generator. Like this is something, again, like that in the traditional work arrangements, we tend to not have, but we tend to avoid. We tend to look at social media, for example, as a distraction, right? Just wasting time.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say this is the best pitch for Twitter I've ever heard. It's like suddenly it feels completely perfect to spend 4 hours on Twitter.
Yes, and so, but the problem is that you need to have the capability, because of course it is a distraction if you're a full-time employee in the typical 40-hour work arrangement, because okay, you might be getting these inspirations, but you can't do anything about them. Like you can't pounce on these things immediately because you're stuck into this highly structured work environment that doesn't allow you to do other things, or you don't have the energy or the time, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of this arrangement, again, like preparation and opportunity, right? Sort of the inspiration, the opportunity comes from this inspiration generator, but the preparation is to have this slack in the system, this free time, this sort of unstructured way, the ability to, as soon as inspiration strikes, to pounce on something. Because again, like I used to keep like an ideas list. That's something that many people do. Like you bump into an idea and you put it on your notes app and you say, someday I'll come to it. I don't do that anymore, right? I mean, I don't think it works. So I used to have like this list of hundreds of things. First of all, I could barely remember what some of the things that I listed were like, and the energy that came when I had that idea, when inspiration struck, just disappears a month later, a year later, whatever. Like all the right neurons that were firing, I didn't manage to capture them in my notes app. That's so. Nowadays, like I try to just pounce on things immediately, right? And you need to be prepared for that, and you need to have a type of structure or lack of structure that will allow you to say, okay, this is interesting. What if I try this like this month right now, right? And I think that's sort of what allows us to discover this discovery phase of self-employment, where you're discovering what works, what you like, what you want to keep doing, and so on and so forth. The benefits from randomness, essentially. Like another concept that's very alien to many people, like embracing randomization rather than than a directed path, right?
Yeah, this is really something that I wish personally, if I can make any sort of change or have a ripple effect, is really praise uncertainty as much as possible. Because it turns out, for those who were listening, they might know this, but you don't. I basically was a tour guide in Israel until COVID hit, and then I had a really good job until then with English speakers. It's a pretty well-paying job in Israel to be a tour guide, and then all of a sudden it just went. So I didn't. In that sense, I didn't have to suffer what you suffered of being in this basin. It's just the mountain in front of me just was kind of chopped off. But I did tell myself, I'm not going to get any job that comes my way to pay the bills, I'm going to capitulate on the fact that I have some savings, and I'm going to do something that is creative. So I've been dealing with that and doing that, and also very much like you in a totally different domain, of course. But first writing a book, then trying to go ahead with this podcast, on the way writing this, writing that, messing with this, having ideas, experiencing different media. And what I learned is that through that period, which is still going on, like, I wish I could say I found things that really work. In terms of how much I love doing this podcast, it's off, it's off the charts. Like, I love doing it. In financial terms, well, I already recognize this is going to be quite a hard climb to make a living out of that, but I'm still very hopeful. But the point is, what I learned during those times of uncertainty and just playing around and not having a clue really where I'm going, is that I have time, just like you, to meet people on Twitter, and even just the human connection, even though I haven't made a dollar yet from my podcast or whatever. Even just is so inspiring, is so energizing. And it turns out that if you have this free time, surprises, good surprises, are even more abundant than bad surprises. So it really pulls the rug under this idea of, oh, I need this security. I need to, if I work 40 hours a week or more, really, for a lot of people, it's many more. Then I get some peace of mind, and I just think that it's not real peace of mind. In terms of a technical question on Twitter, like, how do you use it? Do you follow certain people and maybe highlight your focus on them through notifications, or do you actually use the Explore tab and go look around searching for topics?
No, it's mostly from following people, and I enjoy growing the list of people I follow organically, right? So I'm not a fan of just following people who other people recommend or whatever. It's just I like to feel like I got to know someone, so it takes time. Right? Again, like, it's a very party approach. Like, it's sort of bumping into people, and then after a while things click, and you realize you're more than just strangers. You're something else, like you're acquaintances or friends or whatever. I let that happen. But then there's also an algorithmic effect as well that sort of adds some randomness, right? Sort of you discover new people, and sometimes new thoughts and ideas from the people I follow, for example, from what they retweet or what they comment on. Like the fact that Twitter surfaces some of the things that I'm not explicitly following, but it's still sort of relevant to the people I follow, sort of has helped as well, right? And sort of, again, like discovering people. Nowadays, now that my audience has grown, and sort of a little bit of a community has sort of almost developed under me, right? Sort of when I tweet something, there's always this sort of same set of people who comment under my tweets, right? Ask questions and sort of start a conversation. And I discover people there as well now. Sort of this wasn't possible in the beginning. It's sort of something that is happening more now. But I'm realizing that I get to know people just because they jump into the conversations that I start nowadays. But when I started, no, it was more organic. So again, like, it's one of those things that is very hard to accelerate and to make faster. Just like cooking, you can't just turn on the heat and make it happen in a minute. You just have to let it take its time. And I think something similar this way, like, sort of, you can't just bootstrap this thing by saying, follow the same people I follow and just copy my own list, because there are going to be a bunch of people you have no idea about them. And so all the context about them just matters. It's not just the tweet that they posted today, but all the story about what happened in the past. So it's something that just develops slowly over time, right? And nowadays, my usage is just plain. I just use the regular app and just scroll, nothing simple. I'm not obsessed about not wanting to miss anything or whatever. Again, it's just the randomness of it, right? I just check what's new, And I see people, the most people that I follow obviously are people who document parts of their lives or their work, right? They have this sort of tendency to talk about what they're doing, and I just watch what they're doing. Again, like many times, just nothing, right? You just scroll through, you take a note of it mentally and just scrolling. And sometimes just something strikes, right? Again, this is just regular conversation in person, right? You're talking to people, you're saying, oh, what have you been up to? Somebody tells you something. Many times it's just interesting, but it goes nowhere. And occasionally it might lead to a partnership or collaboration or a new idea for yourself. Like sort of these chance encounters that end up changing your life sometimes. Right? So
which is really one example of this is this podcast, because it materialized because of a random comment. Yeah,
it's that, like everything, literally almost everything is like that. It's it's fascinating. It's a bit worrying, to be honest, because again, like there's some centralization into Twitter, a platform with the algorithm, and whether I get kicked out someday or whatever, because it's interesting. And at some point I'm starting to try to diversify a little bit. Although I would be extremely disappointed if Twitter were to go away or something were to happen to my account or whatever. But again, like you start to wonder, you start to notice how important it has become, right? And sort of it helps to have backup plans of what happens if Twitter were to change its algorithm or ban me or go away or change into a way that makes it very different. It's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't worry about this until you have something to worry about. Some people tell me I don't want to invest too much in Twitter because it's a platform that I don't own. I think it's sort of a bit of premature optimization. I'd rather worry about when you do have something to worry about, right? And then you can sort of have more options to diversify those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. How about in terms of personal life? Is there an amount of time, like a figure in your head, or is it more you just play it by ear? How much time do you actually reserve for just being there outside of this hours where the dollar figure is not part of the Venn diagram? Do you find now that it's easier for you to spend time in that state of mind where you are really there with family and so on?
I think what I found to be most important for me is just to leave pretty much as much uncommitted time as possible, right? And then play it by ear. Sort of, I'm finding the the fact that things are not structured, again, like to keep using the same word, like I'm not necessarily trying to say, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. is family time, from 11 it's work time, and so on and so forth. I like the fact that depending on the circumstances, depending on what needs to be done, depending on, everything else, the weather sometimes and things like that, you just go with it. So it's all depends on how much committed time you have to other things, right? Because if you have a commitment, then pretty much all options go away, right? You have to stick with that commitment, essentially. It's and another aspect as well sort of I discovered is this, that it's sort of the frequency of how I like to do things. I'm enjoying the unpredictability of that as well, right? Sort of, I enjoy the fact that I don't know what I'm going to be doing next week, right? I don't know if I'm going to be, working more or working less or taking it easy. It really depends on the energy, the inspiration. When I wake up, I look around what are the options, what I'm sort of finding motivation to do, and I tend to follow that path, right? Rather than say, there's this time and so on and so forth. And I think we've the same idea to family time. Depends. Our kids, they were off last week, right? Because Thanksgiving time here in the US. So I spent more time with them. Now this week they're back to school. Depends on when they come back and what there needs to be done. It's literally mostly played by ear. And again, like just playing by ear just requires, right? It's just a luxury that you have when you sort of don't have uncommitted time. It's very hard to play it by ear if your calendar looks like, it's like Tetris full of, time slots,
Yeah,
carved
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. That's another thing that I found for myself in my journey, is that even though you might leave that full-time job, for me, my time as a tour guide was always irregular, but I would be away for 10 days all of a sudden, and not see my daughter and wife for 10 days, which is horrible for me. But even when that was not there anymore and I had uncommitted time, it takes a while to still break the habit of wanting to push, right? Wanting to push, to do something. And it took me a while to realize that I might wake up someday and I would be out of energy. I would just want to do something that's fun and chill and not worry about anything. And at the beginning, I would still be very hard on myself with it, right? Because I'm not being productive. So productivity, of course, is this big buzzword. And you know how many tools are created today, tools for thought that are supposed to boost your productivity. But productivity simply does not sit with the type of lifestyle that allows you to get yourself a day off, if you like, and enjoy doing nothing, because that's all you need sometimes to recharge, a day of recharging. And I'm wondering, is this still an impetus that you feel all the time, that you need to be productive, or is that also something that's fallen by the wayside with this change over time?
Yeah, I think sort of in terms of productivity, something that I can't even remember how I stumbled into this line of thinking, but it's sort of, I'm trying to see productivity as the way I describe it is trying to live in harmony with my nature, right? And this is why I have this mental model that I talk about this on Twitter occasionally, and sort of not everyone agrees, but I have this mental model that, we as humans, right, the modern world is an alien environment for us, right, that we've constructed. We've been wired to be hunter-gatherers for most of our existence, right, which was a lifestyle that was extremely different from the life that we live in nowadays. Consider that the modern Homo sapiens has been around for 300,000 years roughly, and for like 97% of the time we were just living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, right, where we woke up, went to hunt or gather food, came back, lived off that. Tomorrow we do the same thing, and it was very different from many different aspects. First of all, there wasn't this idea of wealth and accumulation of resources, right? If you worked a lot and you hunted a lot of food or whatever, it would just rot, right? If you got more than necessary, there wasn't the refrigerator, or the chest freezer, or the ability to accumulate resources. So it was useless to overwork, right? There wasn't that concept. There wasn't the concept of wealth, basically the ability to create reserves and continue to accumulate. And there was also, again, like this unpredictability of what your day exactly. Oh, sure, you go into the forest looking for food. You don't know exactly what you're going to find, when you're going to find it, how you're going to find it, and so on and so forth, which is also very different from the modern predictable slog of you go to work and you do the usual things and you move things, very predictably forward. So sort of why this matters to productivity is that I think our subconscious in particular is it's like a computer that's just guiding us to that kind of lifestyle, right? And sort of most productivity advice that we hear about nowadays, it's sort of advice to try to fight these instincts, to try to find procrastination, anxiety, sort of demotivation, right? To just try to trick your mind into ignoring those things and just force yourself into squeezing more out of your day. And, to be fair, sometimes you need those tricks because the modern world, if you need to do something unpleasant, it's tax preparation day and you need to file your taxes. Sure, it's unpleasant. I need those tricks to do them, right? But I think for the most majority of my days, I would like to live in harmony with those things, where I'm not fighting those things, that I'm embracing them. Like take procrastination. Pretty much all productivity advice that I've ever seen almost advices against fighting it. So at 6, about how to deal with procrastination, creating disciplines, system structures, to-do lists, and so on and so forth. My default is to use procrastination as a signal, as a piece of information that this is likely something that either I'm doing prematurely, or I'm doing too much of it, or it's something that maybe it's not conducive to what I really want, like something that my subconscious is recognizing that maybe my conscious part hasn't seen yet. And I think seeing it from the hunter-gatherer perspective, procrastination might have been like, imagine you're sharpening your tools and you need to decide when it's enough to sharpen your tools. Like you can continue to sharpen your tools forever, right? But sometimes you say, oh, this is probably good enough, right? And you say, you feel procrastinated to keep sharpening them, right? And all these things about dealing with uncertainty in the hunter-gatherer world. Like imagine you're a hunter-gatherer and you've been walking up 10 miles in a particular direction and you're finding no positive feedback that you're finding any sources of food. In the modern world, we tend to want to persevere no matter how hard it is. Keep going, right? Ignore the signals, like believe in yourself, just consistency. But for the hunter-gatherer, that would have been a very foolish attitude to have to just keep persevering no matter the feedback. That's so the hunter-gatherer would have likely said, okay, maybe it's time to abandon this path and go back, right? Sort of these signals of anxiety, feeling demotivated to keep going that path, like I think they all stem back from a general, again, like general sort of approach of dealing with uncertainty and unpredictability, that especially in this type of arrangement that I'm working right now, that I don't know how tomorrow is going to look like or next month is going to look like, I feel that they're super important. And so sort of my productivity approach has literally been like trying to reflect on what my subconscious is telling me, not necessarily obeying it all the time, because again, sometimes the modern world gets in the way. Sometimes our instincts and subconscious do get confused, again, just by the modern world and maybe by some things that we've seen. So, but at least by default, give it the benefit of the doubt, recognizing it. What is this thing? Why I'm feeling anxious? Why am I feeling demotivated? Why I'm feeling low energy, right? And I think many times these reveal that maybe what I'm doing, again, like what's the point of this thing that I'm doing? Maybe I can, instead of keep polishing, I can wrap this thing up, right? And just close it, and that's good enough. Maybe that's why I'm procrastinating. Again, like the hunter-gatherer endlessly polishing or sharpening the tool. And this has helped me a lot. Like recently I joke tweeted almost that, but I believe there's definitely something good about it. I said, my best productivity hack is realizing something is not worth doing anymore. And I think this comes again, like from these subconscious signals, something telling me I'm not motivated to keep doing this thing or to do it. And I realize, oh, maybe this is not necessary, right? And that's it, it's gone. Like, I mean, great productivity, right? Just keep getting rid of something.
I love the perspective of going back and looking at procrastination and productivity from an evolutionary standpoint. I haven't heard this connection before, and I love it. It makes me think, and it connects it for me with a sort of slogan that I use for myself and for others, which says there is more to life than living. So I think that in a lot of senses, we have not really realized the kind of changes that have happened from an evolutionary perspective. And the most important one is that we still live a life where the mentality is one of scarcity, right? And not of abundance. So for hunter-gatherers, they needed to all the time worry about the next day, and that's not something that we would want for ourselves, like really be worried about what you're going to eat. But so we developed all these amazing technologies of farming and and going as recent as the internet and so on. But it seems that most of society has not yet realized that for a lot of us, it's up to us to really live the utopian dream that, there's these people wondering, well, they told us around the Industrial Revolution that machines are going to do the work and we're going to have all those hours off. But look, we're still being employed. And I think the part of the onus is on us to actually tell society or carve it out for ourselves this time, and know that we do live in a society of abundance, and try to see what we can do with this understanding. Because if we stay in the mindset of just surviving, then we get to a point where our survival is very easily achieved today, right? You and I are all but guaranteed to see a month from now to be healthy and well fit, right? Excepting some horrible accident or something. So if we were still in survival mode, it almost by definition would start to bug us, that the part of our soul or personality that aims for something to be harmonized. You use the word harmony, which is great, because it is now not, it simply is not fitting for us to chase the things that simply are for survival. And so people, I think, a lot of the time would chase pleasures because that's what kind of feels good immediately and naturally. But pleasure is actually that teacher which nature uses to teach you how to survive. So and people don't really get to a point where they conceptualize things differently for life in an age of abundance, and realizing there is more to life than living, in the sense that there is living well now. This is what we should aspire to, rather than simply living, which people seem to be very unhappy with. So life in itself is not this good thing. Some people are surviving and are physically healthy, but are having terrible suffering going on within themselves. And it makes me wonder if you could share some of the maybe philosophies. You mentioned Seneca and other let's say philosophers or thinkers. What are some of the works and books that you've read that helped shape this notion of yours, that well-being or lifestyle is what you should start with, is the foundation rather than the happy byproduct?
Sort of the ancient Stoics, definitely there's lots of to learn from them, I think. Not necessarily to take their teachings religiously, but sort of this approach to sort of reconsider, worry about the downside, right, and sort of ways how to deal with uncertainty. It's sort of how I would generalize some of the works of Seneca and other people. That it's like the world is highly unpredictable out there. You don't know what's going to happen to you. There's fate, and how do you deal with fate? And sort of what's interesting again, like it's a very downside first perspective, right, where you imagine all the bad things that could happen for you, try to figure out ways you could recover, or at best, get back to where you were. And then sort of fate can only bring good luck to you, right, if you cover all your negative sides. The works of Nassim Taleb have been super influential to me. The Incerto series, Fooled by Randomness, The Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, and Skin in the Game. Like he's just dedicated his life to dealing with uncertainty. Many of these ideas that I mentioned about, he sort of talks about them in his book, like the embracing randomness and sort of this approach of finding serendipity and benefiting from uncertainty and things like that. Just super inspiring ideas, not just related to business, but to life and many other things, and politics and pretty much everything. It's probably, I know it's very, very cheesy nowadays to mention it, but like Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek probably has been one of the first books I read that sort of made me think about different work arrangements. It's probably where the first time I heard about the term lifestyle design, right, where he mentions it, like, again, like taking this lifestyle approach. Because similar story, right? He has his own successful business, but he was overworked, and at some point he realized, what's the point? And then he tried to almost kill his business, but instead of killing it, he sort of downscaled it to an arrangement that was much more compatible with his preferences. Right? He managed to eliminate the things that he disliked, kept the things that he liked. He was making less money, but now he had just a better arrangement, which was an interesting way of, again, like just reflecting. Let me see, many others. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, super inspiring book about, probably I think about that book almost every day. Again,
Me
like,
too.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know why, like, it's just this, there's this concept of, you get meaning from suffering, right? Or from the challenges that we encounter. Like, this basically, I think it's like, what's a good life, right? And sort of, so that book helped me boil it down to, like, a good life is like a life that I'm proud of, essentially. Like a story that I feel proud of, no matter of what happened, because what happened is highly undetermined, unpredictable, outside of our control. But knowing that you behaved in a way that you're proud of is just super, super empowering, right?
Yeah, I think in the case of Viktor Frankl, it's definitely a book everyone should read, if only for the inspiration that comes from knowing that somebody who's gone through so many travails and tragedies managed to come out with to hold his head high and continue on and do so many great things and be productive. And you're right, it doesn't mean that, I'm sure he had PTSD and everything related with having those traumatic experiences, but he really made the most of what he was given. And to me, at a young age, when I was still struggling with depression, that was definitely a big inspiration, along with Kurt Vonnegut's book, who is also a survivor of World War II, slightly different story, but just coming across people who manage to deal with tragedies, yet pick themselves up and produce work. And it's not in the sense that it has to be even financially successful work, but exert their soul towards some greater good, which ends up really also affecting them very positively. With the Stoics, I recently, so I'm more well-versed in the work of Plato and what he tried to do, but with the Stoics, I really like recently the concept of euroia. So euroia is good flow, literally good flow, which tells you that recently we have this flow has been a buzzword for a number of years now. And people usually think about it as this kind of state of mind where you're in the game, right? It's you're supercharged and everything goes right. But in a setting where it's probably, like at most hours long, so maybe you're sitting there programming and everything works, or you're shooting the ball to the basket and everything goes in. But for the Stoics, it was more of a mood, this flow. So just the feeling that you yourself, your parts, whatever they are, your soul is harmonized and is stabilized and goes through a process of regeneration and so on over time. That is one aspect of having a good flow. And also through the days and years, feeling that there is just no hard obstacle in front of you that you're just so worried about that it makes your here and now feel terrible, which is just this concept that I've fallen in love with recently, because I'm lucky enough to be able to look at the past few months in my life and realize, well, any major crisis of what I'm going to do or something has just been absent. And it's interesting because you realize that enjoying well-being is not a state of peak experiences necessarily. We're so used to thinking about living well from the perspective of having a lot of pleasure. So you look for peak after peak after peak, and you're chasing these peaks. And it's only after a prolonged time of, I think, doing something like you're doing, something like I'm trying to do, that you realize it's nice. I was walking on a plateau, but not on a valley, like at the sea level, actually up here. So I'm not feeling the peaks, but in retrospect, I can see that I'm doing well, and I feel all right. I feel healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you see for yourself? What do you wish for yourself going forward? Do you have your sights on any completely different domains, far away from, you said you learned the lesson not to identify with your expertise. So can you give an example of something that you've tried your hand at that's totally different? And going forward, do you have plans to branch out into even stranger things, let's say?
No, definitely a very good point about trying to not associate myself. I try to be careful when I describe myself, even on social media and bios, and sort of I try to avoid labels in general, because I think they sort of pigeonhole me into thinking that I should be doing something, or I should only be doing something. That sort of, I like the liberty again of considering many different things. I'm trying woodworking as a business recently. It's something that until just 9 months ago, I haven't even tried. I started this as a hobby, and the intent was to keep, doing it as a hobby. Then I think, again, like at one point I realized, what if I start selling something just as an experimentation, as an experiment? And, I don't know where it's going to go. So far, it's sort of been a moderate small win, right? I sold some things. I only launched it like almost a month ago, right? So still very early. I'm making like sort of wooden cutting boards so far. That's sort of I have like 6 designs, and I've sort of been trying to sell them on the internet. I sold 14, right? So it's not some huge success, but it was something, right, that helps me see whether I'm already noticing some patterns. Customers are going more for the cheaper options, or maybe I need to add some more sort of on those lines, or maybe I find some simpler products. But it's sort of, has been something interesting, right? That I started as a hobby, and again, like just to create some pieces of furniture for ourselves. I was noticing waking up in the morning and feeling like motivation to want to spend more time in the workshop doing stuff. I was also noticing sometimes I was overdoing it. I was spending like an all-nighter, and then I feel burned out. So I was sort of adjusting. And sort of then I started to realize it would be nice if I had to monetize some of this interest and some of this hobby, and sort of, again, like I'm almost certain that I wouldn't be wanting to do 8 hours a day working in the shop, right? Sort of, that would almost certainly be more than I'm willing to do. But if I was getting a few orders every month, and I weave them into my lifestyle, and I can do them on my own terms in my spare time, I would almost very likely enjoy it, right? And sort of this being sort of what I've been experimenting with. I don't know what else. That's sort of part of what I like about my current arrangement is just I don't know what my next year 2022 is going to look like, right? It's sort of it's this, and I have to say that because probably if you were asking me last year or the year before what I would have been doing now, I wouldn't have had a clue, right? All the things that I'm doing now, I wouldn't have even imagined, right, to be doing, right? Which is, again, like it would be foolish for me to try to predict next year, considering how things have turned out. But I really enjoy this association with labels, right? I really enjoy that I don't have to stick to a particular job title, image, profession, and that I can experiment and try different things. It just, again, like opens my eyes to serendipity, essentially, like what we've mentioned before. If I called myself a programmer only, right, I would have never tried woodworking because it would have seemed like something that I shouldn't be doing, right? So,
yeah, I really like the idea of, I don't know what 2022 is looking for me, but I believe there is absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be great, basically.
Yeah.
And so lastly, before I'd like you to share with us all the venues where you kind of present your work and ideas. But as a last question, I'd like to ask you, who are the people that you'd at least say to, you should consider giving a try to the lifestyle first approach? Who is a population, or even in terms of, if you can address people in a, don't know if you can do that, but along the lines of, like, if you're feeling X and that, maybe you should try doing that. Also in practical terms, like, how much money should you have saved up to even do this comfortably? It's probably not 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. So I think the general sort of thing is, who should consider is anyone that I think wakes up in the morning and doesn't look forward to their day, right? Especially if it's chronic. Of course, we all have days like that occasionally, but if it's like every day you wake up and you feel like you don't want to get out of bed, again, like, benefit of the doubt to why are we feeling demotivated? And chances are because our environment is not in harmony with us. And I think that's at least a point of reflection. Right? Chances are there's nothing wrong with us. Sometimes that might be the case, but chances are it's not us that's the problem. It's our environment, our arrangement that we've created ourselves. Changing it is not easy. It never is, right? Most of the times, it's not obvious what we should change to. And even if it's obvious, or we know what to, taking the plunge, just changing your environment is always hard. But at least it's very important to be cognizant of that fact, right? And try to sort of incrementally potentially try to eliminate some of the things that you're really disliking, and maybe try to change some things that might help, right? I think it's a very useful approach. About how much money needs to be saved, this is an interesting topic that I talk about it sort of often online. There's this, it's very easy to fall into the trap that, again, like, you feel like there's nothing is ever enough, right? Because you can always, how much savings are enough? How much wealth is enough, right? And this is a challenge. And I think to avoid becoming like a hoarder, where you're just always wanting to optimize your savings account and your rate of savings and your rate of growth and so on and so forth, is, again, like, to take a very stoic approach, like negative visualization of that you're saving mostly to be able to weather the storms, right? Weather the unpredictable bad luck situation that can happen. So I find it super helpful to try to imagine all the catastrophic things that could happen. Now that I have a family, I have to even think, like, what if I die, right? Get hit by a bus and I can't work anymore. For most of these things, luckily, they're solvable by purchasing insurance, for example. It's not that big of a deal, right? You can, at our age...
It's still a big deal if you die, Daniel. We don't want
No, it's a big deal. Yeah, but you make the best out of how to avoid, all the biggest problems for my family. I thought for myself, like, what if I can't work? Like, what if I get an injury, right? Or I hurt my back and I can't, sit in my chair, or whatever, right? You try to imagine all these situations and you try to say, okay, how can I recover from them? In many cases, recovering, again, is not that expensive. Buy insurance, or you might just have a plan B, which might not be optimal, right? Maybe, what if my house burns down? Maybe I go live with my parents for a while until I find another arrangement. It might not necessarily be that you need to have savings to buy a new house, right? And again, like, insurance helps a lot with lots of downside protection things. But then there are things like that you can't really maybe even predict, right? And this is sort of why sometimes having some savings helps, right? Or things that help you give some flexibility. But I think it's I like starting from sort of the negative visualization part, making sure that I have all the bad things covered, right? Whether by savings or by purchasing or by just having a plan B, knowing that if this happens, that's what I will do. the attitude that I've taken is that once I have those things covered, I try to not keep any excess wealth, to be honest. Like I try to spend it right now. I try to take advantage of it, just to add. In general, I like to say, like, I try to spend it by adding beauty in my life. And beauty doesn't necessarily mean material things, improving, although sometimes that is thing. I appreciate the aesthetics and the improving my environment. But sometimes just even spend, like traveling, for example, that's just beautiful experiences with your family. It might not be something material that you possess for anything, but it just might be ways of, because when we talk about spending wealth, it starts to sound like something like millionaires and billionaires. But I think if we're in a situation where we're making more money than what we're spending, that if your lifestyle requires you to spend X, and you're making X plus something else, you have excess wealth, right? So now there's this dilemma of, do you save at all, or do you stop saving after a while? And sort of my rule of thumb has been save enough to cover all the negative things that I can imagine, right, to weather the storm, and then pretty much spend the excess immediately, right? Because then what's the point in keeping in spending? And I think, the wealth hoarders tend to bring with them lots of other psychological ailments that I fell into this trap for a while, is that many people who I know that are always saving, always accumulating, they're also always worried about the stock market, the hyperinflation, the capital gains tax, and all these kinds of things. Right? I mean, why would you want that? Like you would think that one of the reasons of being in a good position financially is to not be worrying about those things, right? So, I think this is very, very, I mean, Seneca talks about this a lot, right, as well. It's just one way of getting rid of these ailments is to get rid of these possessions, essentially, right? And I think the best way, of course, I'm not recommending anyone just throw away their money, right? But it's the best use I think I found is to just spend excess on things that just add beauty in your life and in your life of your family, whatever those be. Obviously they're super subjective, right? Beauty is probably the most subjective thing. But I like home improvement stuff. I'm always improving, again, like spending time with my family, whether they're experiences, even now here, for us it's Christmas time, like sort of Christmas decorations with the kids. Like for them it's a magical moment, so it's just it's they're not necessarily expensive things, right? But I think it's things that just add beauty in the life. It's just memories that remain forever, or hopefully for a long time.
Yes, and I think it's worth pointing out that sometimes the storms that you think you'll weather by having money really turn out to be things that nothing can fix. So if we're really looking at the major blows that life can deal us, we have to recognize that no amount of money is going to fix that. And a good clue that lifestyle should be put first, I think a good example is of all the people who have had to suffer something terrible happen and then it made them change abruptly. So so looking at that, taking it seriously, and also just looking at other examples like that. Thank you so much, Daniel. Would you like to share with everyone your Twitter handle and whatever websites you're on where you're publishing your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm active on Twitter, Vassallo, Vassallo. There's a link in my Twitter bio for my personal website, which has a bit more about my story, my businesses and things like that. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me and to follow what I'm doing and so on.
Wow, that was easy. Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this with me. And I look forward to hearing more about your journey, which I find fascinating and inspiring, I should say. And have an awesome day.
Thank you. You too, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.